Good morning, gents. How you doing?
Good morning.
It's early
Morning, morning,
here
boys.
in Colorado.
It's early. I was out in my backyard trying to do some Huberman protocol and get early sunlight and record this, and my apparently three extension cords run together is not enough to power my computer. So I'm back. I'm back inside.
Nice.
I think it
I,
would have been enough to power something more efficient like a um, Windows-based computer, but Apple probably has different requirements, just higher requirements, a little more bougie, a little more touchy, a little
you gotta
more
get specific plugs
yeah,
with
it's got to be
specific
like it's got to have exact
connections.
Yeah,
uninterrupted
high quality, high
wattages
power.
and yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's
Yeah,
like it's like you. That's a great segue. It's like you, Stephen. High
It's like
quality, high power. The powerhouse of our bodies is our
high power
heart. Hey,
requirements.
as
high-powered
we
hearts.
as we jump into this, so we had Timothy O'Dowd recently on the podcast, and he's a world-renowned triathlete, and he had a heart attack in the middle of his race, and we alluded in that podcast to our dear friend who had some heart issues, and this is our dear friend Steven, co-founder of TKM, who agreed to talk about this. But he had some heart stuff going on that was a scare for him especially, but for all the dudes in the group. And one of the things he wanted to talk about are the symptoms. And as we kind of mold this over, one of the things that we all think is really important is what are the actual symptoms, right? Like what it's different to talk about it from the perspective of this happened and here's the after and here's some things you can do and be educated on. But we want to take this opportunity to talk, like, no kidding, like what did it feel like and what were you going through and what were the physical and the emotional symptoms and the things that all accompanied, because dudes our age, we're getting to that point where we've all known guys that have just have suffered through heart health issues at what would be considered a young age. And as we age even more, I mean, it becomes a very relevant topic to discuss and to be aware of, right? And to be aware of, because, if a world-class athlete can experience this, and Stephen, I would also characterize you as a world-class athlete. There's
Maybe in
there are
competitive eating.
competitive eating, coffee connoisseur drinking, and knowledge of exotic teas. But
Yeah,
yeah, so I want to turn it over to you to help our
yeah,
audience understand kind of what you went through and some of the things just to look for and the things that I mean, you've learned. You've got a significant education since this
yeah,
happened on heart health and associated matters. So let's hear it, dude.
yeah. Thanks. I really enjoyed Monday's podcast. I loved his comment that fitness is not health, and so I really wanted to follow this up. It's interesting that I've been given this microphone to share this with guys because my event was November 4th of 2023. So I'm roughly, what is it, public math here, 5-ish, 6-ish months afterwards. And one thing that I have noticed is that when somebody asks me about what happened, I kind of feel out. I give them a little bit of, okay, I ended up in the hospital, cardiac floor in the ER for 4 days. And the response is, usually one of like, oh my gosh, well, I hope you're feeling better. Bye. Or, um, oh, okay, like you're how old again? And like an interest, an intrigue. And anybody who shows interest, I have decided that like I have a passion for really sharing, like no kidding, what did it feel like? Like what did the hours leading up to that um entail? Because so I'm going to repeat this again. Um Cardiovascular disease is you could say it's the number one killer in America, or you could say it's number 1 through 9 out of 10 killers in the world, depending on how you slice that cake. So both men and women, this is something that is very serious and is the number one. I mean, you can be the healthiest person and pay attention to what you eat and whatever, and if you're not tracking some of your cardiac health, this will be the thing that gets you, right? Um, what I found interesting, and it's funny because I was talking to my wife last night about literally recording this episode this morning, and she kind of had a puzzled look on her face, and I told her, I was like, you know what I realized, like listening to Monday's episode, I have all of the risk factors. My love my parents to death, but my dad had a triple bypass when he was in his late 50s, like full open heart surgery, whatever. I realized last night, I told my wife, I was like, I could not tell you what symptoms he had. I couldn't tell you what his time in the ER was like. I could not tell you what caused him to go to the ER. Like, did he fall over in his suit at work in the office, or did he have, you know what I mean? Like, I literally could tell you nothing other than he had it and the age that he had it at, because I regurgitate that to my doctors now. And so I think that this is important for us to talk about. I think it's important for, you know, guys in their 30s and 40s to hear. So this is cool that we get to do this. But all right. So first off,
And
I
for
am not a
context,
doctor.
Steven, how old are you? Because we are not the same age.
Oh, certainly not. I mean, we don't even look
And
the
you
same age.
yeah, you look
What are you
actually, you look
saying?
older than I do. He looks older than I do, which is really strange because he's not. And
Why? Why is
I
there?
mean, you have way more gray hair than I do.
That is true.
He has way
Actually,
more
that is
hair
true.
than you.
I have more hair. I don't know
Hey,
what color your hair
that's
is because you have none. You look like a baby seal.
He has
flesh
lots of
colored
hair
hair.
on his back. He has lots of hair on his back.
Yeah.
Hey, and none of that's gray. Black,
That's great.
jet black.
But yeah, I'm 36. So young and spry. And here's some other context too. I was an Air Force in a pilot in the Air Force. And pilots are like, let's just be real. They're not the healthiest group. We can be pretty fit in the gym, but I would not say that we live the healthiest lifestyle when you take into consideration sleep, nutrition, and just overall like VO2 max style health. Um, so the interesting piece is I went into the ER in November of last year, and I would call last year, I'm not a triathlete, right? But I would call last year one of the healthiest years of my life. I cut back on my alcohol intentionally to almost an extreme point. I did not cut it out completely. I've kind of talked about this a little bit on the pod before. I allowed myself a couple of drinks once a month, one day a month. I was walking like 45 minutes a day. I had gone from like 236 down to 216. So I'd lost quite a bit of weight in the like February, March, April timeframe. And so um not a triathlete like crushing it like he was on Monday, but still like man, I've sort of done the things that they tell you to do to like get healthy just as a preemptive thing, just to get myself back to a place where I wanted to be. So that's kind of an interesting piece of this story is it was possibly one of the more healthier years I've had. So I'll caveat this with my goal today is to share symptoms, some things to watch out for, explain some language, and then talk about some things that you can do, and to acknowledge some of the frustration involved with that. I am not a doctor. I'm going to point you to some resources that are based on some doctors. You've heard about us talk about Atia and Huberman. There's a couple other places too, but just a little bit of an average Joe take on this subject. So, take everything I say and go do your own research and listen to real doctors, not me. Um, so November 4th, my wife and I had been doing Orange Theory for quite some time. Orange Theory, if you're not familiar, is some pretty intense cardio matched with a little bit of strength. And that was a Saturday morning. It was an upper body strength day at the gym. And we used the TRX rings and did some movements that I had not done before, meaning you're like bridging on your back with the rings above you, pulling up with your body weight. And interestingly enough, I literally was like, man, I crushed that today. Like, I think I even told the coach, she was like, how you feeling? And I was like, man, I was doing awesome. I felt great today. Um, Interestingly enough, that morning I had to drive we have a small, little tiny 1970s style cabin up in the Poconos, and it's 2 hours away. It was November. It was very cold here in Pennsylvania, and we had some do some work up there, and I was pretty convinced the plumber had left the water on. And it's like I said, 1970s style area. Like you got to drain all the water out of the house, or everything explodes inside. And so I was very concerned about that. So I actually woke up at like, I don't know, 5 a.m., drove 2 hours to our cabin, literally like turned the valve on the water, opened the sink, closed it, got back in the car, drove 2 hours home, had a full size Starbucks coffee, both directions, no food. Went to the gym, I think at like the 10 o'clock gym. So had been awake since 5, went to the gym, no food, lots of caffeine, got done, was driving home, and with my wife, I told her, I was like, I just don't feel good. Like, I think I have had too much coffee and no food. And so I'm just like a little bit queasy. When we get home, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Like, and that's sort of, when you have small children, you have to like coordinate your bathroom runs. And so I basically was telling my wife, like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom for like a moment and take a moment to myself. I need you to like take the kids. Um, we had plans for lunch. When by the time I got to the bathroom, my chest hurt and it was left. So I know you can't see this because we're talking on a podcast, but the guys can see this. I'm drawing a circle, like almost perfectly around my left pec muscle. Like if you imagine that, or you put your hand over your left chest, like palm open, that's where it hurt, slightly down the like front under portion of my arm. So I was sitting on the toilet, thinking about this, and I was like, well, I did the TRX pull-ups, and did a lot of them. And so like I think I have pulled my chest muscle. Like I was kind of annoyed at myself, like, I went a little too hard today and pulled that. That's gonna hurt for a couple of days. But it hurt quite a bit. And for whatever reason on the toilet, I literally was like, am I having a heart attack? Um, it's the left arm is kind of what made me think of that. And that's always the classic item. And I was like, well, but it's not excessive. It doesn't hurt a lot. And I just don't feel good. I feel kind of queasy. So I literally like went to Google and was like, am I having a heart attack? Question mark, enter. And brought it up. And there's a couple of options you get there. You get like the Mayo Clinic, you get CDC. And the things that they're going to talk about, right, are chest pain or discomfort, feeling weak, lightheaded, or faint, pain or discomfort in the jaw, neck, or back, like up your neck, pain or discomfort in one or both of your arms or shoulders. But you always hear, the left one is kind of being the classic. And then shortness of breath. So I started to take those off and I was like, well, and I had excuses for all of them. So, chest pain or discomfort, I did a hard workout and it was like right in the area that I was working out this morning. Feeling weak, lightheaded, or faint, definitely. Again, no food, going on, whatever, 10 hours of being awake at that point, and had multiple cups of caffeine. And so I kind of was able to tick all of them off as like something else. And so I this is if you believe in Jesus, this was the Jesus moment of the day, which was I literally was sitting on the toilet with my phone open to, am I having a heart attack? And I thought to myself, I must close this window because my wife and I, like, we will share phones back and forth. And I was like, I can envision, I had this like envision in my head of my wife opening my phone to this page. And literally, like in that moment, I blacked out and I got up from the toilet. I did not close my phone for whatever reason. I stuck it in my pocket and then walked out of the bathroom. Jesus like just hit me on the head with his wand. I imagine Jesus having a wand, by the way. So, so, and we went to lunch because we had lunch plans. And so we drove to lunch and I did tell my wife, I was like, hey, you drive. On the way to lunch, I felt a little bit better. One of the things I had read, and this was the important thing, one of the things I had read was that if the muscle pain in your chest and arm, if it is musculoskeletal, meaning you worked out hard, or something like that, the pain will not waver. You will not go up and down in the pain scale. It will be fairly constant. It'll be like a linear, downgrade over a couple of days. You're sore, it gets better over time, and eventually goes away. If it is a heart issue, then it can come and go. And so I would say that at its peak, my pain reached like a 4 or a 5 out of the scale. And then on the way to lunch, it came back down to a 1. So literally headed to lunch. I told my wife, I was like, I'm feeling much better. I'm feeling okay. Went to lunch. After lunch, like towards the end of lunch and getting back in the car, I was like, not feeling good again. And this pain is coming back. And that stuck in my head, that fact that if it's muscular, it will not go back up and down, but if it is heart, that it can. And I started to press on my chest. And I also realized something else, which was pressing on my chest, the pain did not respond to it. So if you have a sore muscle and you squeeze a sore muscle, like you can feel it. It hurts a little bit more to squeeze it. And this did not respond to that. Like it was very clearly when I stomped and I kind of was focused on the muscle while pressing on it, I could tell it was below my ribs. That made me uncomfortable. It made me nervous. And so I we were stopped at a light, and I had told my wife this, like, man, I like don't feel great again. We may have to go home. And so we were headed home, and my wife needed to look something up, and my phone was the one that was like sitting in the cup holder of the car, and she grabbed my phone and opened it to what page? Google, am I having a heart attack? And and she was like, what is this? With some expletives mixed in the middle. And and I it was funny because like my blackout moment in the bathroom came back to me, and I was like, all right, Jesus, I get it, fine. So I looked at my wife, who is a medical professional. She's an occupational therapist and works in the field. I literally looked at my wife and was like, all right, let's head to the ER. I know that you're not giving me another option. Like I know that this conversation is lost the moment that it began. So like, let's go. Let's throw away all our plans this afternoon. So that's the story of how I ended up at the hospital. I'll stop there. Just if you guys have any thoughts, otherwise I can keep jumping forward.
I have lots of thoughts, but it'll probably off track the conversation. And I know David
That's
will
fair.
probably off track the conversation too. So I say just keep on going.
All right. Um, so I tell this to people just so that they sort of know what they're getting into. If they, so I also, my neighbor as an ER nurse, I also texted her, and her answer was basically the same. She was like, the moment you tell me you have chest pains, I'm going to tell you to go to the ER. You don't get an option. There's no out here. I'm not going to help you out with what you want, which is an out. And I was like, fair enough. So, uh, little known fact, if you walk into the ER and you want anything and you add chest pain to it, it happens very quickly. Literally, it's like I walked in and I was like, I don't know how to explain this. My chest hurts, and they're behind that like huge piece of glass when you first walk in, and they treat everyone with just derision and general like skepticism. She looked at me and just reached over to the door and opened it and said, "Go, sit down." I was like, all right, there we go.
Front of
So
line privileges.
yeah, it is. They do take it seriously, and I mean they do. They literally they walk you to the back, they sit you down, they strip your shirt off, and they put an ECG and EKG on you immediately, and they start running it. And they work on getting an IV in you quickly. They basically treat you like if you walk yourself in, they treat you like you are gonna have a heart attack at any minute. And then they sort of trace you from there. So, spoiler to my story is I did not actually have like a medically defined heart attack. I did not have a blockage or a rupture or a stroke. Um, my story is a little bit frustrating in that standpoint, in that I definitely had a cardiac event, and I'll explain kind of some of the language behind that you might hear if you end up in the ER or the hospital, or with somebody else who is in the ER and the doctors are trying to explain it to you. Um, but so I had some damage to my heart, but it wasn't a heart attack. It was more likely an infection of the sac of fluid that the heart is contained within, which is myocarditis. So that's likely what I had, but it sort of presents in the same way. And I spent 4 days on the cardiac floor because they didn't know what it was, and they thought it was a heart attack. So I got the full experience. I was like a 36-year-old just like jogging around the cardiac floor. Because they tell you to get up and walk, and I was the youngest person by many years, many decades, many David worths. So I let me see here. So one of the things that that they do, the important thing that you'll start to hear if you like are visiting somebody or helping take care of somebody who is in the ER with cardiac issues, is they're looking for arrhythmia, which is an irregular rhythm of the heart. And they're very specifically looking for a protein. So whenever you work a muscle and you damage it, whether it's by working out and getting stronger or something else, it releases proteins. And I may get this word wrong. I probably should look this up ahead of time. I looked a bunch up troponin. So troponin T is the heart protein. If I'm getting that wrong, please don't at me. T. Yeah. So yeah. So troponin is very specifically the protein that is shed if you damage a muscle, and they can identify the one from your heart very clearly from the one from your muscles, because I asked this question multiple times while I was there, and the reason is after a heart event, a cardiac event, or a heart attack, just like your muscle is sore for the day afterwards, troponin is shedding off of your muscle for the next 24-ish hours. It will peak like about 24 hours later. So a normal person has zero heart originating troponin in their system. That's what you should have is zero. A full cardiac event, heart attack style, would be about like 1,000-ish in that neighborhood, 24 hours after. And so when I went in and they pulled blood initially, I had 180. So they're like, ooh, okay, you had something, but you could be a weird person that just has some in your system, or it could be. So they pulled blood every 2 hours for the next 12 hours. And I topped out eventually at 360. So just that's a good, when you start to hear these things, when you start to hear a doctor, whether it's yourself or a loved one talking about, okay, like we're tracing the troponin levels and it's increasing, then that means that something did happen and the heart is still shedding that protein. Whereas if they catch it fairly early and they trace it across and it's level, then that doesn't necessarily mean that like there was damage. So all right, that's like that gets me from, what the symptoms were like and what caused me to go to the hospital and sort of what happens when you first get there. So I'll kind of skip forward. Long story short, they kept me in the hospital for 4 days and they ran me through all different types of tests, cardiac catheterization, which is where they go in, they scope the actual interior of your heart, which is the best test, also the most invasive. It's like truly like full on, they either go in through your wrist or they go in through your leg. Historically, they've gone in through your leg. They went in through the wrist for me, and is kind of a newer thing that they're using more often and is a little bit easier, but they prep you for both. And so they're not going to do that unless they, no kidding, think something happened. Because when they're in there, that's when they have the ability to either a balloon angioplasty or a stent, and fix it. They didn't do either of those things with me. They didn't find anything. They found like a small blockage in a D1. It was not at all um, um, like some of the other folks that we've talked to. Okay. So I'm gonna jump forward a little bit, which is talking about kind of what you can do now, anybody, to pay attention to this stuff. And so I got real serious about my health after this. All three of us, kind of for different reasons this year, have gotten real serious about it. But I'll admit, at this point, I tried to start doing some research and do some reading. I was seeing a cardiologist. I was seeing lots of different doctors and lots of different specialists afterwards. And um, to tell you the truth, it was frustrating. And I don't know if either of you guys have felt that way dealing with the medical system. And so I just want to kind of prepare people that you should be informed about these things. You should take your health and your fitness seriously. You should also trace your health. I think that that's one of the big things that all three of us have learned, whether it's with an Aura ring or an Apple Watch or a Whoop or something, and some blood tests. These are the things that as I've started listening and reading more, hearing doctors and longevity type folks talk about, this is what they all start talking about, is like getting a baseline and tracing some of your blood work, tracing your VO2 max, and just understanding over the long term, what direction am I heading, like getting a directionally accurate read. But I will warn folks that you are going to have to your doctors are very well meaning and the medical system is very well meaning, but it is not built to do this. That's what I have found. Um, Even just getting, I know, like Stu, you said that a VO2 max test was fairly easy for you to get in your area. It was very difficult for me to get in my area. I had several places who wanted a doctor's note for me to get a VO2 max, or sorry,
Oh, the
not a VO2
DEXA
max,
scan, the
a
DEXA
DEXA
scan.
scan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it's been an uphill battle, to tell you the honest truth. And I, my cardiologist is very good, but I went to him with like a list of things I wanted to do, and I got some skepticism back. To tell you the truth, he was sort of like, the question was, why do you want this? I mean, I can do this for you. Basically, I'll write this script for you, but like, I don't know why you want it. And I started to explain to him, okay, I'm not a crazy Google med person. I'm listening to some folks, some, people like Peter Attia and things like that. And it gave me a little bit of a warm fuzzy. My cardiologist was like, oh, my colleague next door loves Peter Attia. The other cardiologists in the building. And so I kind of took a sigh of relief, like, okay, I'm not a crazy person. Like, some of the folks in this building are paying attention to the same thing, but not everybody. So that's just sort of a word of warning before you head into this. Um, so some of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to point you to resources where I heard these things. But very quickly, um, in terms of cardiac health, there's a couple of things. So you've heard about LDL. That's like your bad cholesterol, quote unquote, bad cholesterol. That's what has been kind of the gold standard for the longest time. The reality is, there are three. It's called lipoproteins. That's the second L in LDL. It's low density lipoproteins. There are actually three. There's a word for them that I'm going to mess up, and so I'm going to change that word to bad. There are three bad lipoproteins. It's like LDL, VLDL, and a third one. Typically, we've just paid attention to LDL, and that's what you're going to hear a lot of cardiologists talk about. The cardiac health system is slowly moving, and there are a couple of these are not my words; these are other doctors and researchers' words saying that there are better measurements, and the American Heart Association is moving that direction. It's just that the medical system is slow. And so one of those is ApoB. So all three of those bad lipoproteins, each one of them has one ApoB molecule. And so you can get a test of that instead, and it will give you your total lipoproteins. I think soluble fat might be like one of the right words there. Again, I'm admitting I'm not a doctor here, but I do know that ApoB is a measurement that a lot of folks are starting to use as a really good measurement. Below 80, I think it's milliliter per or milligram per deciliter, whatever the measurement scale they're in, right? Below 80 is okay for folks that are not high risk. Below 60 is in some other materials, is what I've seen. But then if you are high risk, below like 50 is something that folks have said, be more aggressive with your ApoB. Something else that I've heard talked about that everyone should get done is an Lp(a) test, which is just a genetic marker. Think of it as a genetic marker. Are you more predisposed to being having cardiovascular issues? And so they've kind of correlated that with if you have high Lp(a), then you need to be more aggressive on getting your ApoB down. And so basically get a blood test that includes Lp(a) once in your life, and then maybe on a yearly basis do like a fairly standard blood panel that includes LDL as well as ApoB as well as triglycerides and that kind of thing. So that's one of the big pieces that like I had to ask for from my cardiologist. None of that information was given to me.
Yeah, Stephen, that's a good point. Like you actually have to be intentional and like go
Yeah.
like ask for those tests. And a lot of doctors, like your kind of your standard family physician, isn't going to do that to you. So you're gonna have to go find it somewhere else, right?
Yes, right. And so that's why I wanted to talk about some of these things, right? So he spoke about Inside Tracker on Monday. So Inside Tracker is he spoke about two different companies, Inside Tracker and Clearly. Inside Tracker is one of the places that you can get these tests done. I do not believe that Inside Tracker, as of like January, they did not do Lp(a). They have said they are adding it. It's just not on the menu yet. It might be on the menu now, but you can get it done at like a LabCorp or a Quest. You're just gonna have to get a script from your doctor. So Insight Tracker it's a good resource, but it's not cheap. It's like, I think it's more than $1,000 a year, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm basically saying, so I looked at Insight Tracker and I was like, oh, that's kind of expensive, and they give you, it's basically just blood tests. And so I found a resource. I tossed this to our good friend Brad over at Choosify. He's the one that pointed me to this originally. There's a resource called The Living Proof, and they have what are called 10 truths that you can measure every year. 3 of them, it goes through 4 different systems in your body. One of them is cardio vascular, and they have you do 3 different things. It's VO2 max, it's ApoB, and it is blood pressure. So we've talked a little bit about with a bonus of the LP little a, like get that done once in your life. And so that's a great resource, the Living Proof. If you want to go hear more about that, the Rich Roll podcast from January 1st of this year, 2024, has Simon Hill on it, and he goes through all of the 10 truths. It was a very educational podcast for me in terms of kind of having a baseline. And so honestly, like that is if you follow our newsletter, we sent this out probably, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, which I don't think I told you guys that was our most opened and clicked on newsletter ever, was this health episode that kind of talked about these 10 truths. So that's what I'm going to do every year, is I'm going to do these 10 truths and I'm just going to record it. I have a file on my computer, and that way, I can see every year, like, am I generally getting healthier or less on these things? The last thing I want to talk about is he spoke about Clearly. And Clearly is a company that combines CCTA with artificial intelligence. So let's back up one step. There is another test that I think everyone should get. I actually went back and I found on Huberman Labs, one of the doctors that he brought on, speaking about women's health. She said that everyone, men and women, should get this test done, a CAC test, prior to being 45. And if you have higher risk, you should do it a little bit earlier. So it's a coronary artery calcium score. Also, you might hear it as a couple of other things. You might hear it as a Gatson, AGATSON score, or a CACS. So it's basically measuring, it's a CT scan that measures the calcium in your heart, because plaque is what closes the arteries. There's calcium inside of the plaque, and it's a very different density than the rest of your body. So it's easy to identify. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because he talked about Clearly, which is a CCTA, and that is a coronary CT angiography, which is very similar to a CAC, but it includes dye. And so generally speaking, if you go to a cardiologist, they're going to say, let's not do a CCTA first. That's kind of the second step. They're usually going to want you, if they want you to do anything at all, they're going to be more open to you doing a calcium score, a CAC, because it's considered non-invasive, because they don't put dye in you, and you can have a reaction to the dye. So typically speaking, there is you want a 0. So on a CAC, you want a 0. If you have something higher, it can be like up into the thousands. I don't know exactly what the scale is. I've seen one doctor talked about the highest patient they ever saw was a 6,000. But generally speaking, they say that you want to get that done like every 3 to 7 years ish, to be able to trace it. And what they will generally do is on the Khan Longevity Academy, I'll put this link in the show notes. There's a really good page that kind of explains this, that if you have something other than a 0, then on your second, 3 years later, you may consider doing a CCTA, because it gives you a little bit more information. The dye will actually show you if there are any shrinkages, like if the pipes of your heart are shrinking and blood is having a hard time flowing through. That's one of the main things that gives you versus the CAC that doesn't give you. However, there was a very strong study that they cite that was done, that the CAC, the calcium score, is 98%, I think 98.1% correlated to people being healthy, meaning it is possible to have the one specific thing that the CAC calcium score doesn't look for. It's possible to have that, which is shrinkages in your arteries, and that become a cardiac event later on. But it's a very small percentage, and so it's a pretty solid test. Whereas a stress test, like a standard stress test that they would put you through for cardiac, if they thought you had cardiac issues, is like in the neighborhood of like 85% correlated. So So those are like important. So clearly the company, clearly what they do is they go straight to the CCTA and then they run it through AI. And this is one of the areas where, we hear a lot about AI and everybody wants to add AI to their, toaster these days. But this is one area where I think the medical community has really like embraced it. They have said, okay, the imaging that we have is pretty powerful these days. And the artificial intelligence's ability to look at images is surpassing humans. It's very good. And so that's something that they have been able to combine and get some really good results for. And so to tell you the truth, I think I probably am going to go do a Clearly scan, having found out about it. But that's because I've already been predisposed and had an issue with it. So I'll leave it there. That's the what I wanted to share with the world in terms of some resources. We talked about the Rich Roll podcast from January 2024, talking about the Living Proof Challenge and the 10 truths. Don't worry about doing the actual challenge. Just go do the measurements for the 10 proofs. The 10 truths, sorry. And then the Huberman podcast from January 30th, 2023, is the female doctor that was talking about women's health, and they talk a little bit about everybody getting a calcium score before you're 45. It's at like the 2 hour and 25-minute mark. You got to go way in to get it. And then another great resource is Peter Attia. We've talked about him a ton in his. And then there's an article that I'll put in the show notes from the Con Longevity Academy that kind of talks about the difference.
Yeah,
Awesome.
dude, this is awesome. Really appreciate you being transparent and sharing. And one big takeaway for me, I think the medical system and doctors and we have a number of buddies who are doctors. Their focus is not prevention. It's okay, something happened, like let's take care of it, right? You're in the hospital for a reason. Let's take care of this. And so I say that not disparagingly at all. I mean, the workload on our medical professionals is significant, and all you can really deal with to a large extent is just I just have to triage not only all these cases but these individuals as well, right? And so it's very much incumbent on us, and we'll add all these resources in the notes. It's very much incumbent on us to focus on the prevention side. Like that's on us, right? And so I love that point that you make, because at the end of the day, and there's going to even be resistance to that because we're so conditioned to um, you know, we're so conditioned to being reactionary versus being proactive. It's like small things too, right? Like I started based on a heat episode on Huberman, and not a heat episode. It's not like Huberman says it, so you do it. Like there's a lot of data that he pulls, a lot of studies that he cites and reads and goes into that shows the correlating effects of this. So like sauna, for example, something I've incorporated in my life very specifically because of the heart health side of that, in addition to all the other benefits. So there's certain things that we can be very proactive and do, which I think is a huge point here. So I appreciate you, Steve. It's good stuff, man. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. People gotta, just add it to your routine. A lot of us, we pay attention to our finances, and you track your finances every year, right? Like just this is equally important. Don't run out of life before you run out of wealth. And so doing some of this stuff, tracking it long term, kind of seeing where you're headed, educating yourself, asking questions. My cardiologist was pretty skeptical. My primary care doctor, he was like, he's a younger guy, and he was like, that's really interesting. Can you send me that? Send me the 10 truths that you're using. Like, I want to get smart on that. And that opened a conversation for him to tell me, he's like, by the way, there's like a secret preventative cardiologist in our hospital system nobody knows about. I'll send you to him. So yeah, these conversations
Cool.
can lead to some really interesting places.
Stephen, I'm glad you didn't have a heart attack. I'm glad you're not dead,
Yeah,
because I love
me
you,
too.
bro. And I appreciate you, man. This was good info. We'll put all the resources in the show notes. And guys and gals, go take on Common Action.
See you. See you.